Sarah,
Melissa,
what are we doing today?
we're hosting our classmate and friend, the lovely Kate Cartmell.
Kate, what are we reading today?
Dangerous Women by Hope Adams.
We are in the presence of a dangerous woman today, Melissa.
We sure are. We are so excited to be reunited with our former classmate and current friend, Kate Cartmell, for this episode.
You know, the more we talk about our experiences in graduate school and the more that we host former classmates, the more that we establish a theme about our experiences as students. That everyone seems to have been working a lot harder on the program than you and I, Melissa.
Kate was an inspiration that year. She overloaded courses. And I mean, I was getting loaded too. Some might even say overloaded that year, but that was different. And actually, Kate managed to complete her degree in a fraction of the time as the rest of us.
It's true. I mean, she was an inspiration and hard worker indeed. But Kate, you like to have your fair share of fun too. Do you have any distinct memories of our time as graduate students at Memorial University?
I've got to be honest with you guys, there were so many good times, so many good memories made. It's impossible to choose just one memory to share. Between delicious dinner parties at Sarah's and fantastic theme parties, like no one to this day does a theme party like Sarah, and study sessions at Melissa's and theatrical readings at Melissa's. I can't just pick one story, but I can say that I do owe a lifelong debt to Melissa.
I'm totally not expecting this, and I'm so excited to hear this.
Well, as you know, our classes could be very demanding, leading to many, many late nights finishing projects in the wee hours of the morning. And while I could always count on Sarah to keep me company chatting online as I finished my assignment at 3 or 4 a.m. and she started hers, I would never have survived those mornings after without copious amounts of beautifully caffeinated hazelnut coffee, which Melissa introduced me to, and it remains my constant and ongoing addiction.
That is so funny.
It has saved my life many a morning, probably the lives of those around me. So to Melissa, I say thank you for making me a slightly less dangerous woman.
Oh, I love it.
Amazing. They used to have the big jugs of it at Treats in the link.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I might see if I can rustle up a hazelnut this afternoon, I think, to help get me through this beautiful Sunday. Well, we are really looking forward to talking to you about all sorts of things throughout this conversation, but certainly about dangerous women, which I can only assume is biographical, possibly about our time as students in university.
I mean, I think we got into some interesting situations from time to time, but no, this one's not actually about us.
Oh, well, slightly disappointing, but since you actually didn't write this, would you mind telling us how this book came to find itself on your, we're going to try this out again, TBR list, and then on your R list?
Nailed it. And coined a new phrase. Well done.
Here we go.
Our list.
Well, it's actually a book.
It was actually alert.
So it was actually a gift, but not for me. I was looking for a gift for an avid reader in my life, my dad. So I was going through the historical fiction section because that's his jam, and the title "Dangerous Women" caught my attention. So much so that Dad almost didn't get this book. And when he did, it was on condition that I got to read it as soon as he finished it. I think the title Dangerous Women really got my attention because we have these stereotypes of women being naturally nurturing and protecting rather than dangerous. We even tell our children, like, if you get lost in a crowd, find a mom, a woman with children, because we have this assumption she will protect her children, therefore she will protect children. And we think of moms as these safe beings, and if they're not, we think they should be.
That's so true.
Right? So the title kind of, for me, promises it's going to be something a little different than the stereotypes, something unexpected, maybe more three-dimensional. But lastly, kind of what sealed the deal for me on this one is that the author was inspired to write the novel after seeing a piece of art called the Raja quilt. And I love anything art, and quilting has a special significance for me because of my grandmother. So I was very curious to see how a quilt, like this pretty benign, domestic, functional household item, inspired a story about dangerous women, convicts, and murder.
And I'm curious, you mentioned that quilting has a significance on your life because of a grandmother, and also that this book you and your father have kind of shared. Is it your father's mother who's the quilter?
Yes, yes, it was
nice.
actually. And she passed away a little more than a year ago. So it's, it's still kind of fresh, and every little reminder of her is really kind of important,
Yeah.
And to share it with your dad too. Yeah, that's really lovely. Okay, so we've got kind of like a broad strokes picture here. We've got the dangerous women concept that piqued your interest, this quilt. Can you kind of like zero in a little bit more and give us a summary?
Yeah, the novel is a fictionalized account of the actual voyage of the convict transport ship Raja, as it brought nearly 200 female prisoners from London, England, in April 1841 to Van Diemen's Land, present-day Tasmania, in July of the same year. So many chapters begin with a description of a piece of the Raja quilt, which was created during the voyage on board. All events are very interestingly presented out of chronological order. We jump around before, during, and after a violent attack on the ship, which eventually results in a murder investigation on board. The story is written in a combination of first and third person narrator, often from the perspectives of 3 of the so-labeled dangerous women on board. So it really does keep your interest, because you don't know who you're going to hear from next, and you don't know if you're going to hear like a motivation or a reaction to an event, because it's all out of order.
And that really probably keeps it, the kind of mystery of it all, really ongoing throughout the read, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And the 3 voices we hear most of the time, there's so many connections because they're women living in this era, but they are also so very different. I mean, first readers meet Hattie Matthews, a single mother who is convicted of theft. She stole clothes from other children to sell in order to support her own son, Bertie, and he's actually on board with her. She's one of the very few women prisoners who is allowed to bring family members with her. And she receives this mysterious embroidered threat on her life, which confuses her. She doesn't understand why she's the focus of this threat. And she is attacked and stabbed roughly 3/4 of the way through the journey. But at the very opening of the novel, it's the very first chapter that we encounter.
What a way to begin a book.
A confused person being stabbed.
Wow.
And then we meet Keziah Hayter. She's the youngest woman, or one of the youngest women on board the ship, and she's also the matron of the ship. So she's in charge of all of these prisoners. She's not a convict herself. That makes her very unique because she's the only woman on board with even a semblance of authority on a ship completely run by men. She is pretty highborn, but she's the black sheep of her family, choosing charity work in the form of rehabilitating fallen women over many proposed marriages. Her main focus is split between constantly defending the actions and character of her women, which is how she refers to the prisoners, defending them to the men on board, and also she focuses on the creation of the Raja quilt, which to her is this epitome of beauty and art. It is a creation that she wants to leave for the world.
And probably an attempt at the rehabilitation act that she's so seemingly focused on. And
for sure, it's this whole idea of teaching women a skill, which is interesting because it kind of leads to our last first-person narrator, who is Clara Shaw, who I found very interesting. And even having finished the book, it's hard to know if I like her. We find out that she killed a man after he attacked and killed her companion, and then he savagely beat and raped her. She is so convinced that she will be executed for her crime, and all those around her agree that she would hang. So while in prison, she steals another woman's identity to secure her place on the ship. And although readers are privy to her thoughts and her emotions and her reactions to things, for most of the book, readers don't know which character she is. Her real name is Clara Shaw, and all we know is that she is one of these 18 chosen women to work on the quilt, but we don't know which one for quite a while.
She John Drapered this person. Identity theft before the internet is just stealing someone's name tag.
And she literally does. She knocks out this other woman and steals her name tag. So like we've got those 3, but the author also gives insight into a lot of the other prisoners, and interestingly the circumstances of the society that forced them to turn to crime in order to survive, and the lack of control that they have over like the labels and expectations society puts on them.
It's a lot of kind of commentary of, we become dangerous when we're backed into a corner, right? Anybody does, any human, any animal. You feel like you're threatened and you become dangerous because you're going to do anything to survive. And how that manifests depending on the situation.
I was listening to a podcast the other day and Margaret Atwood was talking about The Handmaid's Tale. And she kept coming back to the idea of like what choices are on offer. We make decisions. Sometimes we make bad decisions, but sometimes our decisions are limited by what options are available to us, right? And it sounds like that sort of question could be pursued with all of these characters. Like, because initially when you were talking about Clara and you described the scenario by which she's introduced, and I was like, what's not to love? Like, why are you curious about why you would like this person? Like, I think she's kind of fierce and badass, but then she also kind of then screws someone else over
and potentially then condemns this other person who only had a petty crime to death.
Yes.
If that's what she was so afraid of. Like, she's willing to say, all right, this person I don't know, I want to survive, and so you have to die.
That's worse than the crime. Like that part is worse than what she did to be a criminal in the first place. What have you been up to? Why did someone beat up this companion in the first place? Were they mixed up in some shady stuff anyway? Do we know that?
We do. We get to know, I want to say quite a bit. Like, there's still a lot of blank areas, but we get to know quite a bit about particularly these three women who narrate part of the story. And Clara's history, very much how you said, it comes down to what choices are available. And Clara has a very interesting story, I find, and her companion is dead. She could have ended up dead. She had no other choice, but now she's going to hang for it. But there was all of these other things in her past that led her to this scenario, and so many of them seem to be out of her control. And you kind of admire her for surviving, but she's done a lot of dark things. But it's easy to judge, I think, from our modern times and our place of privilege, like some of the things that she did to survive and to help other women survive. But it gets very dark.
Who was the matron of the ship?
Keziah.
This woman seems to have a better head for the rehabilitation side of things, right? Let's recognize that maybe these decisions are not always made independently as someone with a range of options, right? And so that she has more of a focus on just giving them opportunities to choose a different path or take a different path.
Absolutely. Keziah, her mother in particular, does not really approve of her. They don't get along. They clash heads. Keziah is convinced her mother has never loved her, hates her, and she won't just follow along and do what she's supposed to do. She idolizes her cousin, who was a royal painter, doing portraits of the queen and the family, and she gets to go with him sometimes. And because of the status his art gives him, she got to meet the queen, and their family has this great reputation. And then she turns on, and rather than marrying well and, having babies to prolong the family name, she spends her time in the prisons. She falls in with the Ladies' Society, and their whole idea is to educate and give skills and support to these women so that they can climb out of crime. Keziah is very young and very hopeful, sometimes maybe a little naive, but she's also commendable in many ways. The character herself is very willing to stand up against these many men and figures of authority to fight for the reputation of her women.
And kind of maybe like recognizing her own privilege and using that privilege for good.
Keziah, being from a place of privilege, she stands up and tries to defend them. But she does get frustrated. If I could read a couple little quotes here, she's talking to, I think it's the captain, but a few of the men on board. And she says, most of the women below would have been driven to crime by impoverishment in money and in education, pointing out flaws in their society. And the men get a bit defensive at this. She adds later, they're hungry. They're poor. They steal to please their husbands. They are taken advantage of in so many ways, pointing out further flaws in how their society functions and sort of the hierarchy in it. And she fights and she constantly argues very politely that these women can be better. Something has failed them. But even with all that, at some point she gets so frustrated because she's arguing with the captain. She's begging him to give one of the women another chance. And while he's generally pretty reasonable, all the male characters are fairly two-dimensional in this book, and I'm okay with that. It's about the dangerous women. He doesn't listen to Keziah. He argues with her. He says, basically, I don't care that you've spent time with these women, that you know these women. I'm going to do this because I can, because that is my role as the man in charge. And she gets frustrated, and in the book, she says he would do what he wanted to do, and the devil take her opinions. So even this highborn, well-respected woman who does mostly what she's supposed to do can be discounted completely by even the kind, respectable man.
I love how books in general, such a gift when they really distill something and it allows you to view your own world, your own experience in a new light, or even just to validate some of the things you might be feeling in your own life. I just absolutely love that so much. And I think that there's something really relevant to that here with, this is set in the mid 19th century, but we still got this character like mansplaining stuff. I'm just going to do it because I can. Thanks for coming out, but devil eat your words, or whatever his weird phrase there was. I don't think there's any one of us who doesn't have a similar type experience in their back pocket that they could be like, no, I still experience this type of behavior when I try to do something in a way that I know is right. But then similarly, I mean, how often do we hear stories in the news about women who are being criminalized for caring for their children pretty much 200 years later, like copy and paste, but then just change out, they all have iPhones instead of quilting needles or whatever. Did you already know about the Raja quilt?
No, I had never heard of it.
Me neither.
And yeah, like I said earlier, it was just sort of this, how did a quilt inspire like this big mystery murder thing? And there are certain times where it's kind of like, okay, Hope Adams, maybe enough about the quilt for 5 minutes. I want to know more about this event or that murder or this attack or this person's history. But she really does bring it all back to the quilt, and it ends up being a very significant symbol, a legacy of these women. And we don't know many of their names. There is a prisoner manifest somewhere, but in the novel, the author does not just list 200 names. It's kind of interesting to have this piece of physical evidence that they were there.
I want to go back to something you said before, and I really appreciated it when you said, I recognize the male characters in this story were two-dimensional. And then you said, but I was okay with that. And I recently did something very unpopular, which was sided with a male narrator and second guessing my decision to publicly do that ever since. But in any case, sometimes in these types of stories, the male characters do kind of become caricatures. But then that also gives the author kind of a bit of a shorthand to be like, you don't need to know all about this person. You just need to know about like the pervasive sentiment of the time to help you understand what these women were dealing with. I do just want to ask a little bit about the male voices. Were they just sort of present through dialogue? Were there any positive male characters in the story?
I mean, obviously there are many men in the story, in the background, and there's many men in the histories of the women. But while the women are on the ship, there's sort of five. Like there's all these other nameless characters, sailors doing things on the ship. But we have Hattie's son, Bertie. He's a grieving young boy when his mother is injured and she's so sick and she's in the
infirmary or whatever.
Yes, infirmary. You don't know much about him. You get a little insight into his personality at the very, very end. We have a doctor character, Mr. James Donovan, and he could be summed up as cheerful. We have a sailor character, well, I think the only one who gets a name, Isaac, and he's quite gentlemanly. But at the same time, he's married and he does start an affair with one of the women on board, knowing that she would be in trouble if they were caught.
Again, copy and paste to 2024 and the same deal.
And then we sort of have like the two other, ends of the spectrum. We have Reverend Mr. Davies, and I think he's there to represent the problems facing women in the society at the time. He is against giving the convicts any freedoms because they did a bad thing. He constantly dismisses even Keziah, who's never committed a crime. He dismisses her and her opinions, especially during the investigation, even though she's the only one who has spent time with the women, who knows about the women, who knows anything about their characters. And I think it's funny because he genuinely seems fearful of the women having any freedoms. Like, he doesn't want them near him. He doesn't want them talking to him. He doesn't want to acknowledge their existence.
Even when you were describing him, I'm like, so this guy's full of anxiety and on a power trip? Like,
absolutely. And
there's
absolutely
his two dimensions.
I wonder if like these, because you said it was about 5 male characters that you actually kind of have like names for and get a little bit of their perspective. But I almost wonder if the male characters are symbolic. You've got the captain who has the absolute power because he is in control of the ship. No matter what anybody says, it's ultimately his decision of what happens on that ship. You've got this clergyman who kind of maybe represents this idea of male dominated opinions and morals through religion. And then you've got this ship hand who is at once sympathetic and kind, but also has no problem taking advantage of a situation with one of the women, and then you've got even Birdie, like he's the next generation and he probably has more power in a weird way as a helpless child. I didn't read the book, obviously, but I'm just like wondering if, even though they're not super fleshed out, like, are they a symbol ultimately of this ever-present male power?
I think you're right. I think absolutely that's the impression I got, because we don't get a lot of depth to them. And really, like, we have, like I said, the Reverend Mr. Davies, who is against any rehabilitation, and they're just punish them and ignore them and get rid of them. And then we have Captain Charles Ferguson, who Keziah really respects. She calls him reassuring. And what I found really interesting was Hattie is attacked. Hattie is barely conscious for a long time, and she eventually passes away. All the women know almost instantly, right? Because they've been fearful. They don't know why she was attacked. They're afraid they might be next. If she dies, now it's a murder investigation and someone will be hanged. Someone will be executed. So, oh no, what happens? But the captain still has to gather everyone together on deck, make his official announcement. And while on one hand, maybe it's a sign of respect, this person has died and I'm letting you know. To me, I couldn't get past the idea that her death isn't a death. It isn't a fact. It isn't official until the man in charge comes and makes an official announcement that it has occurred.
Yeah, I would totally have that reading too, of like just someone coming in to be like, you might not have believed it from some of the other sources that you heard, but when it's coming from me, it's definitive and it's true.
Actually, if I could just give like a little brief history of a couple of the women, Hattie was doing what she was supposed to do. She was a maid in a fine house, but to keep that job, she had to submit to the Lord and his two sons. So she's expected to be sexually available, but not promiscuous. She becomes pregnant. Birdie. She is immediately dismissed because women are expected to be fertile and abundant, but not when it's inconvenient or expensive. She's
getting
kicked
chills.
She has no way of earning a living. She finds a man and he takes her in for a while, but the baby takes her attention. And the baby makes noise. So he tries to convince her that she needs to get rid of the baby. And she loves her baby so much, she's like, not a chance. So when he's asleep, she steals what she can and she gets the heck out of there and moves to another part of town, hoping he'll never find her. And as far as we know, he doesn't. She was doing what she was supposed to do. And then she was looking to a man to support her, as the society of the time sort of encourages. None of that worked out for her. So now she steals and she gets caught and she gets imprisoned and she gets transported with her son. And she's actually happy to be going somewhere else. Clara's story is so interesting too. She's one of the older characters. She lived in an okay house, but her parents died and she can't own property and she can't run the house because it belonged to her father. So she looks to her brother, who refuses to take her in. So she's on the street. She ends up getting taken in by a fairly wealthy man. He takes her in as his sexual plaything. And at one point, she demands payment. And he laughs at her and says something like, oh, you cheeky little thing. But then he does. He does give her a roof, a bedroom, clothes, food, and a payment every time that they do anything sexually. And sometimes it's sex and sometimes it's other weird things.
Recently on the podcast, we talked about the guest, right? And I cannot help but think about when we talked about her as this survivor. She was doing crazy stuff. It's like, why are you doing this? And you're putting someone else in danger now. But it's the same thing. Like, these are just women to whom so little is available in terms of choices and resources, even the infrastructure that exists, right? She has a house, she can't own property, her brother won't help her. So any of their possible safety nets rely on males, and then suddenly males demonstrating some sort of charity or generosity. Well, perhaps I'll let you sleep with me for money. And this is sort of seen as like he's bailing her out.
And I feel like if you were to go into any women's prison and you were to sit down and listen to stories of many of the women that are in there for especially like, say, drug convictions, you're probably going to hear same kind of story.
And Clara really is like sort of the ultimate survivor in this book too, because she goes through all of that. The man supporting her dies and bequeaths her enough money that she can go and buy her own house. So on the one hand, he's kind of abhorrent, and on the other hand, he's almost this kind figure in her life. She can now buy her own house, but now she's stuck with, how do I make a living? How do I keep this house? How do I keep it running? How do I feed myself? What makes me question if I like her or not? She needs to make an income. She sees a problem in society, and she starts to take in babies whose mothers can't care for them. And she adopts some of them out, but she disposes of many of them as well.
Whoa.
That's rough.
So, yeah. So we have Hattie, who this man said, oh, you can stay here and I'll look after you, but you got to get rid of the kid. And she's like, no, she runs away. But so many women are not in a position to do that. Hattie has a memory of her mother giving up their youngest because too many mouths to feed, can't do it, and being heartbroken. And Hattie never got over losing her little perfect baby sister. And eventually you find out it was to Clara. Hattie doesn't figure that out right away, but you find out eventually, and you never find out if that baby was adopted or disposed of, and it gets so dark. And I want to hate Clara for doing that, but at the same time, in this weird perspective, she is helping these women survive in an impossible situation, in an impossible society.
I think this is so fascinating because the children characters, I was really interested in Birdie when you first brought him up, but now knowing that there's more of a theme around essentially reproductive rights.
Yes.
Right?
Very timely.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. In a moment when this is still being discussed in our communities.
Yeah, the idea of how your own lack of control
Absolutely
can make the biggest impact on your life.
And someone else's life.
Yeah, and someone else's life. Yeah. Oh,
incredible.
The title of the novel, Dangerous Women. Yeah, we have this overt danger of Hattie has a threat on her life, and then she's attacked, and that's dangerous. But I don't think that's the main danger in the novel at all. Like, the women are in danger, but how are they dangerous? And I think it's because they are evidence. They are evidence of these problems and paradoxes in the society that the people in charge, the men in charge, don't want to see. Be sexually available, but sexually pure. Be fertile, but not when it's inconvenient. Be polite regardless of how you're treated, but don't tease or tempt. Take care of your home, own no property, take care of your family, but most paying jobs are considered inappropriate. All of these impossible things. The threat or the danger these women pose is to the illusion of this functioning society. That so many are left in impossible situations. Society itself is creating the problem, creating more criminals, and at the same time trying to take away all of their choices and all of their rights to control their identity, their labels, their bodies, their babies, their existence.
Wow, yeah. So all of that and a quilt in the meantime.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'd like to read from the novel, and it's Claire's observations about the quilt after it's completed. It has been finished, and the investigation has been completed, and we've almost arrived in the colonies, and she's looking at the quilt, and she says, "It's very beautiful. I never thought of how it would be when we started. Just one piece of fabric coming after another. But here it is, and there's so many bits of cloth, and they make something. I'm proud of that. Once I'm dead and gone, my work will be in this coverlet. That's what lasts in the end, doesn't it? Us, we'll be dead soon enough." And she continues on thinking, that's what we too are like, us women. We're a patchwork. One person next to another, then her next to a third, and so on. Different people pushed together, some neatly beside our neighbors, some out of shape and awkwardly sewn into a botched closeness. We've arranged ourselves into this shape, fair ones and dark ones, older, younger, thin, fat, ugly, pretty, and everything in between, and near on 200 of us on this ship, taken far away, existing side by side, sleeping together, eating together. Here are friends and enemies. But we've turned ourselves into something. We're many small pieces, each of us different, but now stitched together, a patchwork of souls.
Wow, absolutely beautiful. What a way to end a book. And maybe what a way to end this podcast. I'm going to ask the question that we ask at the end of every single episode. Kate, would you say that Dangerous Women by Hope Adams is a could read, a should read, or a must read?
So I enjoyed the story. I thought it was interesting. I thought that it was going to be a should read. However, in light of recent International Women's Day, in light of so much of what we're seeing going on in parts of North America and the US with women's rights over their bodies, control and autonomy and the choice of labeling oneself, this is absolutely a must read. Whether a woman is cis or trans, I want to believe that there is or there could be this community of womanhood that we are all connected to, we are all a part of. We need to recognize each other, support each other, empower each other, because 183 years after this novel is set, we are still fighting to be seen and heard and valued, and to have our work valued and our successes acknowledged at the same level of our male counterparts. So in a society where we're still putting both the blame and the responsibility all on women and expecting women to figure out how to survive within a system still largely designed and controlled by and for men, it's an absolute must read. If you're a woman, if you love a woman, if you're raising a woman, the characters in this novel face much of the same dismissal and undervaluing and discredit that many of us still do today.
Amazing.
So well said.
Thank you so much. And so delighted to be here with two strong, powerful, amazing women talking about this amazing book and this really important topic. Thank you so much, Kate.
Oh, thank you guys so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
This brought me right back. You know, when we were talking about you coming on, I said, you know, I know she's going to bring a wonderful perspective, and you did, as you always do, Kate. We love you.
We love you.
Oh, thank you. I love you guys too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.